mic is now on. Welcome to Soul Food Poetry Night. I'm Michael Dillon Welch, and with Tanya McDonald, we're pleased to welcome you to Soul Food Books. We curate this monthly poetry reading series, and tonight is our 7th anniversary. We've been doing this for 7 years, which is pretty exciting. A couple of years ago, we had a cake. We didn't have a cake, sorry, not this time. We're very pleased that you chose to be here instead of, I don't know, whatever else you could be doing on a warm summer evening. So thank you for making the choice to be here. We'll have 2 featured readers, then a break, and you can purchase books or things to eat. And then we'll have our open mic. If you haven't yet signed up for the open mic, it's right down here. And our question of the month is your favorite seaside activity. And I think 1 or 2 of you may have signed up before that question was at the top of the page. So if you feel like going back and adding your favorite seaside activity, please do so. And you have to decide if sex on the beach is a seaside activity or a bar activity. I don't know. I'd like to start by reading a piece called Love Poem by Curtis Dunlap, who lives in North Carolina. Love Poem. Sometimes I like to imagine that she's Googled me. She'll read a few of my poems in an online journal. Remember the one I penned for her decades ago. She'll rise from her chair, retrieve an old shoebox from a closet, sit down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, tenderly lift and unfold a yellowed scrap of notebook paper, read that love poem aloud, smile, look wistfully out the window into her rose garden and say, I'm glad I didn't marry that bastard. Okay, now it's time for the main event. Our 2 readers tonight will be reading together. So this is a first for us, I think. And it's also the first time I think we've had a father-daughter pair of readers. So we're in for a treat that way too. So here's the official bios that I'll share with you. Terry Person has published 3 poetry collections, and now this from Moonpath Press, which is the most recent one. There it is. Every Leaf from March Street Press and Barn Tarot from Implosion Press. His poems have appeared in independent and university journals, including Wisconsin Review, Yarrow River Run Nebo, Oya's Review, Hiram Poetry Review, and a whole bunch of others. Terry's website is terryperson.com. And also reading is Nicole Person. She started writing poetry during her studies under the poet Gary Copeland Lilly. And alongside her novel writing career, and you have, yes, there it is. I'm jealous. I've tried, it's very hard. Alongside her novel writing career, which started at age 16, when Book Trope Editions published her young adult fantasy novel, A Kingdom's Possession, she has seen many of her poems published by small literary journals. While she finds writing inspiration in biology, astronomy, archaeology, psychology, and artistic discovery, her primary inspiration for her poems is history. Nicole often speaks at libraries, writers' groups, and writers' conferences across the country. She's currently pursuing a degree in creative writing. How's that going? Good. Nicole lives in Washington State, but I can tell you the secret is actually Port Townsend. Yes. Her website is nicolejperson.com. So please join me in welcoming Terry and Nicole Person.
I want to say thank you to Michael and Tanya for inviting us. I appreciate that. We love doing these readings. Even though we're scared as hell most of the time when we're up here, we still enjoy doing them. Tonight what we're going to do, Nicole and I have done this before, so we're going to go back and forth. I'll read a poem, and then she'll read a poem, and it'll give you a little flavor. We're both write differently than one another. And we hope that's a little bit more interesting than just me droning on for a half hour and then her droning on for a half hour. I'm going to start with a poem. I might as well start with the first poem. From And Now This from Moonpath Press. This is the new poetry collection. And this is called First Memory. I'm standing in a corner, crying. My hands are not my own. They're trembling. I wear hand-me-down t-shirt and trousers. I'm in a one-room house with a potbelly stove, no indoor plumbing. The bed is unmade. It's cold, crowded. It's hard to breathe.
So, let's see. Well, you mentioned that I am getting a degree in creative writing, and for my final project, I'm almost done. For my final project, I'm doing a book about my father and talking about his writing over the years as well as his life and sort of how I've been relating to that as a young writer. So I wrote a poem in his point of view about that same first memory, so I will read that now. It's called Outside the Screen Door. Through the metallic scent of the rusty screen, nature pulses against the stilted house with shades of plum and wet sage. I yearn to scrawl my life on the paper of birch trees, to get my hands dirty each afternoon and clean them again by the dew of each returning morning. I face the rough, plaster white wall in the corner, my cheeks hot, imagining the texture of dirt, weeping for what lies outside. I cannot go, not while the backyard is flooded, not while I am alone, but I refuse to believe the idea that life is not a playground.
Okay, the next poem I'll do, I'm going to do a few poems from And Now This in a row, and then I'll move on to some of the other collections. But I grew up, my dad was an alcoholic, and this poem is basically about my dad. So I've written a lot of poems over the years about my parents and my siblings and everything else. This is called In the Story of My Father. In the story of my father, the clothes are all blue and white. The days begin before first light, when the dog's howl is still hollow, when owls hoot and look for field mice. In the story of my father, a black lunchbox opens to warm cheese sandwiches and coal black coffee. The odor of carcasses blinds and dulls the sense of smell. It is a black smell of lifting soaked hides onto hooks for long Pennsylvania days in a tannery built next to a creek where blood trickles from the drain pipes and clots at the neck. In the story of my father, I am hated more than loved and feel that I deserve to be pushed down. I deserve to be forced to kill our pets, bury them as they die one by one. In the story of my father, I do not belong to his suffering, except that I am alive and take food from him. There is much which is not said, and little that is shown. There are guns and blood and death in the eyes of my father, and there is the story of my father in the story of me.
So my poetry chapbook is based on, it takes place in the 60s, and I wrote a lot of poems in the point of view of Jacqueline Kennedy as sort of a persona poem project for school a while ago. So this poem's a little bit older, but it recently got picked up by a small independent press, which I was kind of excited about. So it's in Jackie's point of view. It's called Stillborn. Stillborn. You're floating and I can't stop you from drowning in fluorescent lights. Hang tight while I try to gain myself. Baby girl, I'm sorry. So sorry. Remember me from wherever you are while I remain composed and keep myself for you. They are dressed in white, forcing me away while I promise I will not make a scene. Let me. Hope that this gravity holds me while I choke on the dust in your empty bedroom and watch as the flowers wilt in the windowsill. Stillborn, you have no name to mark your grave. I had hopes and dreams for you, but there is no reason to open your eyes, so I will turn off the lights.
That's always been one of my favorites, so I'm glad she read it. I spent 6 years in the Air Force and spent a year over in Thailand. And so I have quite a few Thailand poems, but this one, this is one of them from a long time ago. It's called Three Sets of Children. And I have it in 3 sections. So section 1. American in Thailand drags his wife and 2 infant children into the dungeon of drink and drugs. The children's bright eyes watch as he wastes himself. They will remember with pride the man who will eventually divorce their mother. Their noses, like their minds, run wild in the tropical weather. Number 2. The prostitute's children run in the small, weed-filled yard after a stray, hairless dog. They scream in laughter, not knowing how their mother pulled them into this world from Vietnam 3 days before their village was leveled by napalm. And 3. My 2 sons haunt my nights. One likely to forget his father, the other dreams of me landing in the field behind the trailer. My year may be short, but their time passes like clouds in the open sky, changing at every turn of wind.
So I actually spent some time in Thailand as well, in a very different setting. I was teaching English in a very, very small village, and this poem is a true story, unfortunately, of my trip up to the village. It was 8 hours away from Bangkok, and it was a really long car ride, and I was very sick. So it's called Thai Freeway. In the back of an 8-seat bus, pimped out with big speakers and a small television blasting music videos and American movies, I sit crumpled over, sick, and wonder why the driver had to place the Tide plastic bag full of my vomit on the dashboard to slosh and slide for everyone to see when he could have tossed it out the window onto the flat roadway where stray dogs are roadkill and poor women sell noodles with dry unnamed meat for nothing.
So to break things up a little bit, because I think we're getting a little morose here, I'll read from Barn Tarot. This is the first collection I had out through Implosion Press. They're a small publisher in Ohio. At the time, they've done quite a few chapbooks and collections, and Eventually, of course, like many small presses, they get tired or run out of money and they fold, which is too bad. Lucky for all of us these days, there's Amazon, and they gave me my rights back, and so I just go ahead and produce them through CreateSpace, and it allows me to at least have copies still available. But I'll read the title poem from Barn Taro. It's called Barn Taro. When you turn down the lane and see the barn missing, you'll know it's time to move out. If it's merely empty and falling in, dust rising from recently fallen lumber, perhaps a death kept secret, perhaps a divorce or separation. But if the barn stands straight, with fresh paint and oiled hinges, if flowers grow like happy geese around it, and light lifts one side into divine brilliance, then all is well. A marriage, a 50th wedding anniversary, things can go on as always.
This one is another from my Kennedy chapbook, is what I usually call it. Again, in Jacqueline's point of view, it's called Marilyn. Low cut, tight. She has something I don't have, something to hide, and lies, staining her dress crimson on white like the flush in my cheeks, back arched, chest out, pressing against the space in front of her. I see her in magazines, and the way he looks, the way he smiles. He sees her differently than he sees me. Those cheap lies, crimson stains are on his hands when he touches Marilyn, me, and they'll always be breaking my heart.
I'll go back to And Now This. This is an interesting book. A lot of these poems are poems I've written about childhood. As we all know, some of these are a little dramatic, of course. Not all of it's perfectly true, but the sentiment is often there. And this is something that actually happened to me in a strange sort of way. Anyway, it's called Shooting Puppies. We had a lot of dogs and a lot of cats when I grew up, just everywhere, because there was no money to have them neutered or anything like that. We were very poor. As I had mentioned before, we didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 8 years old. So there were a lot of things that went on there, and this is one of them. So Shooting Puppies. The tiny black and white puppy yelped. Blood dotted his forehead as it laid down in the hole I had dug in the thick dirt of the backyard near the telephone pole. There were 7 in all to kill, but the 22 had become heavy, and my 8-year-old hands shook just like the final shudder of the first puppy's body. One grave for 7 little bodies we could not give away and could not afford to feed. Eventually the grave filled. I covered over the hole with the soil from the same yard we played in.
This one is about the second man in space. It's called Star Shepherd. His last name was Shepherd. I was too busy doing what I had to do to think about the possibilities of fame, the possibilities of failure, and the earth and the sky and the stars flying by. Ground control rattled in my helmet, words spit from my own tongue, much the same, tumbling in my head like white noise on the radio. The earth did look mighty blue, but I was thinking more about how small it was and how big it all seemed from the ground. You don't rush those kinds of missions, and I don't mind that I was only the second man in space. From there, none of it matters anyway, but with Kennedy's talk of having a man on the moon, the weight of the world felt pretty heavy on the astronauts taking the risks to make it. In space and in starlight, floating peacefully, it's easy to forget how big the world really is, because from there, it is small.
Saving lives. So, again, I'll read from this collection. I really didn't have such a terrible childhood, as much as it sounds. I think I write those poems because they're the more emotional ones and the ones that I can sink my teeth into sometimes. But I actually think I had a fairly decent childhood most of the time. But this one is again, it's a kind of a memory that I have, and I've worked into this poem. It's called Saving Lives. In the back of the old Plymouth, permanently parked deep in weeds, was a nest of field mice, often called pests, and killed with the heel of a well-worn boot. The tiny family of little-fingered sized, pink eyes closed, squeaking babies nestled in the stuffing that leaked from the torn seat. Not wishing to disturb their home, I straightened up the weeds, erased my sneaker prints, and sat near the front fender in the heat of summer, listening to tiny sounds only I could hear.
Changed my mind. This one is another poem I wrote about Thailand. Stepping right off the plane, it's called Air. The air hits like a wet wall, collects on our skin, makes us heave and wonder, where have we landed? Our descend onto a tarmac, stitched with white paint to mark the jetway, the swelling squeal of plane engines in our heads. Crowding into an open door bus that can only take half the people coming, but handles us all, unnerves me.
I take it that most people who come to a poetry reading also read or write poetry, and so I think you're aware the hard part about doing this, and I can hear it in Nicole's works. I've read it, and I know what happens when I read is that you can't hear the end lines very well. You know, we have to read through most of the poems somehow so that you get the gist of the poem. And I often remember it's funny because I remember all the hard work everybody goes through to get those line endings correct. And yet when you read, that's the hardest part to get across. And I'm always reminded that, particularly with this poem that I'm going to read next, because it's the kind of thing that I tend to read through rather quickly, even though it's 5, 6, 7 lines for each section. I just think this stuff is interesting. So this is called Small Town Sequence. It's in 5 parts. I like doing these segmented poems for some reason. They're a lot of fun for me. So we'll start with Small Town Sequence 1. Even with all the comforts of a big city, you never really leave, do you? 2. In a small town, every street goes somewhere specific. 3. From the rooftop, the small town looks like a large one, only the people aren't so small. 4. When I left my small town, I didn't have an accent. Now, I never cease to have one. And 5. Driving back from the mountains, I realize how long the wood scent stays in my clothes.
Handful. How many more do I need to have?
Just tell me when you're done and I will.
Okay. This one's called Amen. Yeah, I saw it. That turquoise Chevy pulled up real slow, right up next to the Baptist church. Took me a lot not to say nothin'. Being real scared and all, I promised myself I wouldn't say nothin'. I closed my eyes when the white man got out of his car and shut that turquoise door. I peeked through my fingers watchin' when he put that funny-looking box under the 16th Street church steps. It was an Alabama Sunday morning, in the same place King been talkin' up rights on votin' and equality, stuff I never listened to, but now I do, because I once knew that little girl Addie, a nice one and real smart, excited about the Sunday school, and me and Jesus saw that turquoise Chevy pull up real slow, saw the white man step out with his box and place it under the Birmingham church steps, all careful and whatnot, maybe so it wouldn't blow too early, but I like to think that white man looked back at his turquoise car and was thinking, Lord, I'm doing wrong today, but Lord, I'm scared, and that's why he did it. And I like to hope the last thing he said was Amen.
I'm going to read a new poem. It's pretty short. It's called Synesthesia. It goes like this. Twisting the pretzel words as though the red of knowing were an answer to every blue sky or fearful Sunday, every purple 7 or salty weekday, is like loving an angry tree or stepping on the cloud's honor. And we don't want to do that.
So I go to school in Vermont, and every semester I have an intensive thing that I do over there, so I have to fly back and forth a lot. And I spend a lot of time in the airport when I'm doing that because for whatever reason, the layovers always end up being really long. Vermont's pretty small and there's not a lot of traffic over there, so it's cheaper. That's a good point. So one time I was in the airport and I was sitting there for like 5 hours reading. And it was really early in the morning, and I had a really, really rough red eye. I was really tired. And I saw this man working on a crossword puzzle, and he was there for like 4 hours straight, just sitting there looking at this crossword puzzle. So I wrote a poem about him. It's called Crossword Man. He is already there when I get there, doing his crossword, the rest of the news, paper in disarray on the airport gate seats. Gray letters on gray faux leather strewn over cold gray armrests. He wears a white beard, sandy tweed. He hasn't moved. 1, 2, 4 hours, twiddling his pencil, mouthing thoughts, answers. I am too impatient for crosswords. Crossword Man, is your crossword done? He stands, sits, stands again, gets in line, project abandoned. I don't know how many gray letters he wrote in his smudged crossword, the paper strewn over gray seats, but his plane leaves. Yeah, pretty new.
I write fiction also, and I write science fiction and fantasy and mainstream fiction, and so this is kind of a science fiction poem, if you will. It's called The End. In the future, we do not die. Our lives become the same day after day. We have 1,000,000 years to write that novel, so we don't write it. 1,000 years to fall in love, so we become bored with our penises and vaginas. We realize there's no heaven for us now. We're like toys that repair themselves. If there ever was a God, we believe he abandoned us and to ourselves, and we no longer know what to do or think. We no longer know why we are even here or what it all means. Nothing changes.
This one's another one about Marilyn Monroe. It's called Sleeping Pills. I have a handful of poems about her, so. Sleeping pills. Mascara stains run down her cheeks beneath blue eyes, sweet blues, wet and swollen from objectification, being a victim, an icon of sex. It becomes easy to take them, a sip with water or wine, sleeping pills to hide inside the mind of a woman blessed with the curse of appeal. I think I'll just do one more.
You're just going to do one more?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that gives us close. It doesn't matter. I'll just jump right into this. It's called Without. No doubt the neighbors see him dance at night alone, his arms out, then close, as he twirls, happy now that she's gone. Or has he forgotten her because he is old man? While in his head, they dance together, her hair flowing through air, her arms matching his, her thigh pushing into him. When she leans close, her cheek, her heart next to his, he hears her ghostly voice.
I can do two. This one's called Nam. Rot is airborne, thick as steam, consuming clothes, festering, old wounds, making our skin slick, decaying our photos of women we once knew or loved. Now we breathe Nam in, a new kind of woman. We soak her up through our pores and pour blood into her, into the rot, so that maybe she becomes merciful.
I have not heard some of these poems she's written, so this is great. So this is called, I live in Port Townsend, this is called Fort Worden. The place of readiness, the Zen master said, is a place of no action. A shot was never fired. The fort rested, ready, and unused for years. Now, poems rise like historical plaques, notices of memories never allowed to come to fruition. Sound waves from a distant, invisible, ships from a forgotten war.
So this last one is called Thailand. Um, I recently read one of his newer novels that is about his experience in Thailand when he was in the Air Force. And it sort of sparked more poems about Thailand and me as well, because I haven't been for a while. And so this is a fairly new one. Thailand. In a place where we wash our clothing by hand and take cold showers midday, I found myself in over my head, gasping for adventure, but timid of drowning, smiling at orange-robed monks, offering them mangoes, taking from them apples. Carved elephants and hand-woven silk are bartered over, and the exchange of red hundreds for the priceless is final. We feed stray dogs with water scars, scraps of lunch, and eat snakes that wriggled 2 hours before. All this not realizing that this is where old boxes labeled Thailand come from.
So I'll cap this off, and I thought I'd read a poem called Writing Poetry. I shuffle back and forth to the kitchen whenever I want coffee. No one lives with me anymore. They've all left or died. When I look back into the room where I sit with my desk lamp and computer and paper, it looks as though everything is inside a dark tunnel with a slight glow from a single bulb. How many years, I wonder, have I sat at that desk and written or rewritten, not knowing who might or might not read my words, who might or might not care about what my thoughts focused on or landed near. I scratch my rough beard of 3 days and pour another cup of coffee before I wander back into that dark tunnel to listen, smell, to feel what else is inside me, scrambling to get out. Thank you all.
Thank you both for your reading and sharing your poems and reading together, which was a nice treat. Interesting to see the relationships of some of the poems, the echoes and changes. We'll take a short break, so please come and check out the books that they have here. And if you hadn't already noticed, Soul Food is now selling food, more kinds of food than just the pastries and treats that they used to sell, and that's because starting this month, Soul Food has new owners. And so there's been a few changes, such as the addition of the couches back here and a few other changes. But most things are going to stay the same, including Soul Food Poetry Night. One thing that I hope does not change is that during the break, you will, in fact, go and get something to eat or to drink. And we'll see you again in a few minutes. And if you haven't yet signed up for the open mic, please do so. Thank you.